Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is David Schwartz. I'm the former Chief Curator at the Museum of the Moving Image. Now here, glad to be here in Manhattan today for this really amazing event that is not only part of the New York Film Festival, but part of a centennial celebration for the ASC, the American Society of Cinematographers. There is a really great retrospective throughout the festival of classic films throughout film history that are great examples of cinematography. So I hope you can check out that schedule and check out some of those films. Just quickly want to thank, on behalf of Film at Lincoln Center, the Blanche and Irving Laurie Foundation, which supported all of today's programs. And special thanks to HBO for serving as a presenting partner of New York Film Festival talks and of Film at Lincoln Center talks all year round. And also to Warby Parker for serving as a presenting partner of the retrospective. And I am very excited to have our panelists here today. So let's bring them down. We have three of the most amazing cinematographers working today. So please welcome Ashley Connor. Rodrigo Prieto. And Chris Teague. Sure. And hopefully if we do well, we can be in the trailer for next year's festival, so. So I want to congratulate Rodrigo for the triumphant opening night film, The Irishman, which played last night. And it was amazing to see in Alice Tully Hall, Martin Scorsese launched his career with Mean Streets, which was a movie about a fucked up bunch of young guys, and this film is about a fucked up bunch of old men, old guys. So. So to introduce the panelists, I wanted to start by showing, we for the publicity, we have still images of you all working on set. So I want to have you tell us what we're seeing. So let's put up the slide of Ashley Connor. We could bring the light down a little bit. I love this. Is a very heroic pose here, but could you tell us what we're looking at? What film?
The movie actually just came out yesterday, called The Death of Dick Long. I was shooting in Alabama. I tend to wear the same outfit every single day. A jumpsuit. We were doing a rather uneven dolly shot. We had a very, very small crew. And I was probably scared of ticks, so I took my socks into my
that
pants.
explains the socks. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I think the next one is Rodrigo. Okay, so please explain that machinery over there. I think that's a camera.
Yeah, that
what is going on there?
That is, we called it the three-headed monster, that we're shooting a prison scene. And the thing about the three-headed monster, the central camera is the camera that's capturing the scene, and on the sides we had so that's a red helium, and we had two Alexa minis on the sides. The minis were witness cameras to capture the information of depth of the shots, and this was for the CGI face replacement. And so one of the big challenges was, as you see, it is a monster. All the cameras in one head, so we had to figure out how to make it lightweight enough and not too crazy big to be able to manage the camera and to be able to have it in a remote head and and things like that. So I tested and tested and tested, to make it feasible to be able to do the shots. But in this scene in particular, we shot the scene. It's a dialogue between Hoffa and Tony Pro. We shot it with 3 cameras, and so one camera is a 2-shot and the others are the overs simultaneously. So essentially 9 cameras shooting the scene. And so in each camera has a focus puller and and the monitors, and it was pretty insane. So that's what we're doing.
And you just work with one camera and ticks.
I have ticks, but this kind of ticks.
Chris, let's look at Chris on set. I actually love that you're looking at paper. It seems so
I know.
old-fashioned.
I'm actually surprised. I've switched to the iPad now, so this is.
What are you looking up?
These are the sides for the morning, or for the day's shoot. This is on Russian Doll. This is at the Horseshoe Bar in the East Village. This is what I do every start of every day. I look at this and remember all the shit that we have to do and how hard it's going to be and what the biggest obstacles are going to be and all that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. So thanks for that. We can bring the lights up a bit. So, so the way we're structuring this, what I want to do is I describe this as a show and tell, and we have 2 clips for each of the cinematographers, and so we're going to run the clips with the sound track turned down, so you could feel free to talk during the clips and talk about what we're seeing on screen, what you're doing, and we'll have some time at the end, for questions and a broader discussion. I do want to say at the outset that Rodrigo, who was very generous to be here this morning, because it was, I don't know when you went to sleep, it couldn't have been that long ago.
Yeah, didn't get much sleep.
Okay. It's a long film, so so Rodrigo has to leave at noon to go to right to the airport to go out actually to an American Society of Cinematography event in Los Angeles.
That's right.
So it's not rude if you leave at noon. So the program might go a little bit longer. So the first clip that we're going to look at is Ashley's work from Madeline's Madeline. The Josephine Decker film, which is a wonderful movie. I hope you've all seen it. And it is, I guess, just in terms of describing the film, I mean, it's a film that's very fluid in its style. And it's a film where, you're following the narrative, but what you're really following, I think, is the emotions of the characters. It determines a lot of what we see. So do you want to say anything about the film before we run the clip? Or should we just launch into it?
I think let's jump in.
Okay, so we'll jump in, and then you can talk while the clip is running. So let's go.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah, you can.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, the movie, I kind of in school studied a lot of experimental film, and I'm inspired by a lot of artists working in that realm. This specifically, she's sort of talking about a dream that she has. And a lot of the movie takes place from Madeline's perspective, and we kind of enter her perspective a lot. And so this one specifically, it was really about being with her, being of her, having the camera feel like you're an active participant within the scene, and it kind of, I always, Josephine's films to me are more visceral than they are anything else. So it's really about making the audience feel the dream as opposed to just seeing it. We're speaking of low budget, this film is incredibly low budget. So it's not like we can light the entire space. We're using a lot of natural light. We're kind of playing to our strengths. A marker of my work with Josephine has kind of been this concept of an uneasy focal plane. And so, the first 2 films we did were on DSLRs, which was, a different way of storytelling. And this one, I said, I can kind of do this. I'd been working on this strange rig since college. And my wonderful AC is here, Will Castellucci, for helping me make it. But I basically wanted to create the gooeyest image I could, and I often described it as melting it.
And could you just talk a little bit about the setup for the scene? Because it feels like you're shooting it in a very free way and capturing moments, but the lighting at the same time feels very beautifully worked out and not haphazard.
Josephine, the way she kind of works is more, the actors are improvising a lot more. They have guidelines, but, she kind of came from a mumblecore background, and to me that was the antithesis of everything that I went to school to kind of study. And I don't mind low budget, but to me it has to carry a sense of cinema in the greater sense. And so when we started collaborating, it was really just, she kind of let me explore the places that I wanted to within the scenes. And she's still the kind of only director I've worked with who is very excited by the dangerous aspects of not knowing what you're going to get. And for this, you know, it's the whole film is very elliptical. You kind of enter her world, and then reality kind of falls away, and you're very much experiencing potentially a mental break. Yeah. So, I don't know.
And just before we go on to the next clip, is there anything you could say about like how you're working with the actors? Of course, it's Josephine's job to really work with them, but you also have intimate relation.
Yeah, I mean, I always call it a pas de deux, you know. I'm speaking with them, I'm speaking of them, you know, I don't know where they're going to go, so it really is on me to kind of listen to what their bodies are doing. And that's sort of why, you know, Will, again, I'll call him out, is an incredible focus puller, and I'm not an easy person to pull focus for because I'm so active, and it's not like we're giving marks, it's not like we're doing blockings, we're just letting kind of people explore. So it is a difficult job.
Yeah.
Thanks,
yeah. Will. Okay. So the next clip we're going to look at is Chris Teague's work on The Mend, the terrific movie by John Magary. Is John here, by the way?
Yeah, he's right up there.
Okay,
Hey, John.
great. So thanks for coming down from uptown. So this is a really great film, primarily about a relationship between two brothers, and it's set in the Hamilton Heights neighborhood uptown. And a lot of the film is set in this sort of cramped apartment, but actually the scene we're going to see is a nighttime scene in a park. Yeah, I guess we'll. Why don't you? Do you want to do the same? That's actually good use of that chair. Okay, so let's run. We'll run the clip from The Mend.
Okay, yeah, like David said, most of this movie is in a small apartment, so it was fun to have an opportunity to kind of open up the world, particularly with this scene. It's definitely, for our very, very low-budget movie, a very ambitious thing to do a night exterior in a park with no kind of existing lighting, so we had to be very smart about where we were pointing the camera and what we were looking at and how we were going to be able to light it. And what I love about this is, I mean, you can hear it with the music, like there's this kind of, we're kind of entering a magical world here with these two drunken brothers arriving onto a film shoot, which is such like a classic New York experience. And it was, you know, it was an opportunity to play with all the kind of elements of what you might have on a film set, like colored lighting and fog and smoke, and just really, you know, really push it. The fog machine stopped working, I think, halfway into shooting the scene, so that was fun too. But I remember scouting and trying to find, you know, a location where we could, you know, build this world, show like where can we see a film set, where can we on our budget create something that looks like a real film set, and then also have our film shoot and make it feel like it's kind of far away. We're seeing it through, you know, through this forest, like it's this kind of magical experience. Just in terms of accomplishing it, I mean, trying to be as simple as possible, basically picking two backgrounds that worked for us. This kind of wooded backdrop here and then down the hill where the film set was, and trying to limit what the world that we were seeing so that we didn't have to light up the whole park because we really couldn't.
So Chris, I have to ask you this, Chris. I was reading like interviews with you, and particularly about this film, and there's a passage where you say that you had just gotten married, and the honeymoon was like overlapping with the shoot schedule, and so your wife went on the honeymoon, and you did. You
I'm so glad you brought this up.
Yeah. I know this is now the Oprah show,
I'm gonna turn this into a positive story. When I came down to New York City to interview for Columbia for film school, I was so entranced by the program and the possibility that I might be living here and working here. I had this image in my head of one day I'm going to be working on these tiny, really passionate indie films, and I'm going to be sleeping next to my camera. Like, that's how intense it's going to be, you know? And so you fast forward 7 years, and I'm sleeping on the floor of John and Minna's apartment, waking up next to C-stands and sandbags, and getting photos from my wife of her walks on the beach in Hawaii, where she had to go on our honeymoon without me because we couldn't cancel any of our reservations. So, you know, the dream came true, in other words. It really came true.
And so what could you talk about what drew you to the project? I think this was was it your first feature film directing? Yeah. You were described as a film, I know. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, we're old friends. We both went to school together,
Okay.
so it was such a fun collaboration and like a natural collaboration. It's so great making movies with your friends from school because you have such a history together personally, and also just a library of movies that you watch going through school that inspired you. So, you know, there's less of, you know, when I work on a project now, there's a real effort to kind of get to know each other and to get to understand each other's aesthetic sensibilities and interests and stuff, and try to get on the same page. Where with school, there's just so much of that already built in.
Yeah. And I just want to ask one thing, that we'll go on to the next clip. But we weren't able to see any of the apartment scenes. But could you talk about like the challenges of shooting? You know, there's some scenes. There's party scenes, and there's scenes with a lot of people in this very cramped space. And what were some of the challenges of shooting that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess everything you'd expect is just, you know, lighting and fitting a camera in a really tiny space. But I think how we were smart about it is we knew right off the bat, I mean, this was going to be the most challenging thing in the whole project. And so that was the first thing that we shot listed, and you know, John had storyboarded a lot of it, and we kind of broke it down and just broke it down into its elements. And you know, the more you start to break it into pieces, the simpler it becomes. But I think there was the real challenge of how to make it not look the same over and over again. And I think that just goes back to treating each scene as its own thing, and letting that kind of inform how you shoot it, and you know, trying to use this space as best you can. And it's written really smartly, where there's a lot of night work there's a lot of day work, and then there's a power outage, so that creates a whole new look for the space. So it allows us to kind of explore new things.
Okay. Great, thanks. Okay. Well, Rodrigo, you are now in the thick of a amazing collaboration. This Irishman was your third feature with Martin Scorsese. They've all been quite different. So could you talk about, we're going to see a clip from Silence. I guess maybe just, I want to ask you sort of in general, I know that Scorsese, you know, does storyboards, like really has a very clear idea, shot by shot, of what he wants to do. Yet, you know, you're brought in to do your work. So what's basically how would you basically describe the collaboration?
Well, he doesn't do the storyboards that much anymore, but he does shot lists and on the script, and so he jots down annotations, sometimes little diagrams, sometimes little drawings on the script itself, and it's hard to read. It's really hard to decipher, but that becomes my Bible, and I get a photocopy of it. But he does explain it all to me. So we spend a couple of days where he's just translating everything. What is that, Mary? What is close up? Oh, okay, close up. You know, so that's basically, and sometimes he'll have separate pages with drawings. So he will not storyboard with drawings the whole scene, but he'll have key frames or key things that he saw. Very basic, you know, drawings. But so yeah, in fact, in this clip, it is based on one of his drawings.
Okay, great. So so Silence is a different kind of film for him. There's a lot of exteriors. He's really known for shooting in city environments. You had just done Wolf of Wall Street. Like, it's hard to imagine two more different films. But so what was? Could you just talk about like what the idea was, or you know, your sort of plan was for Silence, for the look of the film, and then working in a situation where you're really affected by nature every day. This, you know, mud and sunlight and.
It's interesting because Marty doesn't consider himself at all a nature person. Right. And he even says that growing up in the tenements, in Little Italy, and he would not even know where the sun would be. He spent a lot of time inside because of his asthma and all that. And he'd just look out his window, and that's why he says that he likes top shots, because that's the way he used to see life happening in his town growing up. But so then when a movie like Silence, where it's so much about nature, he from the beginning told me, listen, I don't understand the way the sun moves. I don't know what south is or what, So it was funny the way I had to. Okay, Marty. So we have to shoot in this direction first because whatever it may be, that's east. And okay, Rodrigo, whatever, you figure that out. But so for Silence, for me, a big part of it was a harshness of the elements. It's we didn't want it to be a beautiful nature film, even though the places we shot in Taiwan, the places might be beautiful, but we didn't want to enhance that in any way. I used these anamorphic lenses, but instead of using older anamorphic lenses with their beautiful distortions and these things, I went with actually a modern set of anamorphics that are very sharp and dry and clinical in a way, master anamorphics. And I thought that was good, because even reading the novel, it has this sense of the heat and the flies and the discomfort.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, a big part of trying to get this look.
Okay, so let's roll the. Yeah, we'll roll the clip that we have.
Okay, so this scene we shot in a little meadow in a park. It's actually a park in Taiwan, in Taipei. And the challenge was that Marty drew this thing very much like this, with shadows and lines going through it. And the challenge for me was that it also described in the script that when he saw the interpreter, which is the other character you'll see in a second, the sun is, he's blinded by the sun. That's actually in the script. So, so that meant that I had to have, create a light source of the sun behind the interpreter. But the location really didn't have any way of bringing in, a condor or any sort of thing like that. So, and we shot the scene previous to this right outside, so I couldn't have any lighting gear there. So I actually was lucky that there was a branch on the tree behind where we were able to hang a light. So the big challenge was I needed a light that was bright enough to feel like sun and be bright, as bright as the sun, and yet light enough to be able to hang it from a branch. So it was also pretty polemic because, there's a national park and this and that, but so I was also pretty scared of if it was going to feel like sun or not, and you don't know until the day you're shooting and you actually turn on the light and, but if it doesn't work, it's too late. You just have to go with it. So this is, I think, also an example of putting the character of Rodriguez, Andrew Garfield there, and he feels he's enlightened, literally. He feels he's with God. So that made sense to me to put the sun on him, right? It's a theme that I continued on the film, to have him be lit by the sun and others be in the shadow. So that was also, part of the theory behind that.
Great. Okay.
So I'll go back here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we are gonna move along. Our the next clip that we have is from a music video. So I think we know, usually associate cinematographers with their feature films, but there's a lot of other types of work, including music videos, and you've done a fair amount. So could you talk a bit about what you get out of music videos and what you like about them, and then we'll go into the. We're gonna see the opening of the Angel Olsen video for Lark.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I mean, for me, I like to do movies and I like to do music videos. I'm not so much a commercial DP because I think, I don't like capitalism that much. But so for me, when I'm working between films, I still find music videos a place where people are still willing to take risks and explore images and do different things because the stakes are so much lower. Angel is somebody who I've been collaborating with for 7 years on a bunch of her videos when I'm available. And so for this album cycle, I kind of came in and shot and directed them only because I understand I can do things kind of differently. So Angel's songs tend to, in my mind, carry a lot of weight and movement. And this one, you know, whatever the narrative kind of the song is, this woman, she like is finding herself again, leaving a bad relationship. So I sort of guided the video being like, okay, sure, we'll have you like have a vague relationship, but I don't give a fuck about that guy. And, you know, for us, it's so intimate because, you know, Angel's a musician. I don't think that we'll get to the part where she cries, but she gives a great performance in this video. But I can kind of talk to her on a different level than most people who I work with, because I can ask her to do things that I know that she's capable of, but maybe isn't always asked to do as a performer. So, you know, this whole setup, whatever, woman on the run. And then it's funny, Film Comment asked me to do a podcast about drones, and I was like, I fucking hate drones. I hate drones so much. They're the bane of my existence, and like everyone just wants a fucking drone all the time. So
I agree with that.
yeah. But this one, I was like, if I'm gonna use a drone, I'm gonna make it psychotic or like more in my world. So I wanted it to be a little bit more exciting than just what I normally see drones used for. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a marker of my work is being on the level, being with people, human intimacy, ways in which humanity speaks to each other. And, you know, for me, that's through cinema and images. And so drones have always felt like a tool that disengages from that and isn't something that I've always been interested in. So Angel really wanted a drone, and I was like, okay, if you want a drone, I'm going to do it my way and not, you know. And the guys were like, you really want this? I was like, yeah, go through, like, just silly stuff that I normally wouldn't do.
Okay, the drone disclaimer. So okay, so the next clip is from Russian Doll, a great series that was on Netflix and
Emmy winner.
Emmy winning.
Wow.
Okay. So this, one of the things that I love about the series is just the different look of New York City that it creates, and it's, you know, and it also has a sort of magic style to it. So could you talk a little bit about how you like define and set a look for a series when there's going to be different directors of episodes? And
Yeah, I mean, I think we were. It's different on every show, but with this one, I mean, I came on board where there was already a lookbook that had a lot of great reference images in it, and then the production designer Michael Berker came on and brought his references, and I brought mine, and then they all got sort of synthesized into this one document that talked about, you know, color and light, shadow, tone, a lot of different things, and that became our Bible, you know, for all the department heads, and we gave it to my gaffer, my colorists, you know, operators, and everything, and it was, you know, you always have that where you kind of talk about the look and the feel of a show, but to have a document that I thought was so specific and had such great imagery in it, I felt like it really got us all on the same page very quickly, and then I used that as references for the color palette of the show. I pulled little squares of color from a lot of the images, and then we would kind of, dial our lighting in to match those colors, or pick gels that match those colors, or our colorist would kind of, you know, try to fit it into that framework, or, you know, give us a kind of departure point. And then in addition to that, we were fortunate to have this kind of hero location, this set, the loft apartment set that, was our sandbox that we could build from the ground up, and then, you know, designing that and thinking about every single corner and element in that space really informed the look of the rest of the show. It became this kind of exciting challenge to take this thing that we had full control over and figure out how to bring it out into New York City, and kind of match it in some ways, or, you know, diverge from it when the story required it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's we have a short clip from this, so we could run the Russian Doll clip.
Yeah, so this is in our apartment set. And for me, coming from indie features and stuff, I hadn't really done much work on sets before. So it was a little bit scary for me because there's always this challenge of like, how do you make it look like a real space, because you're building it from the ground up. You don't have anything to work with, and you kind of have to imagine what that space might feel like. So it's exciting, but it's also super challenging. And then you had this other, thought in your head where, well, I could put lights everywhere in the ceiling if I wanted to and put them wherever I want and just turn them off and on. But then when you start to think about what that looks like, it starts to look like a TV show or a sitcom, everything lit from above. It's very easy. It makes things faster, but it doesn't look like real life. So we ended up not hanging that many lights up on the grid there, just accents here and there, and then working mostly with practicals to kind of fill the space with highlights and color, and then, and then lighter actors and kind of treat it that way.
Yeah. And it really feels like it's a very close collaboration with production designer, costume designer in this series. Like there's a way that the look is so
absolutely. It was such a gift to have those talents on board and just to have really great conversations with them. And I think Michael Bricker, the production designer, has a great sense of light and space. And so it was sometimes with production designers, I feel like they kind of keep you at arm's length, and they're like, well, I've got my ideas, talk to me. Or there's this thing that happens where you start and you're like, let's talk about it. And then they're like, well, it's a little too early. Let's not talk about it yet. And then you get closer and they say, let's talk about it. And they say, well, we're kind of too far down the road already. I think there's been things are already kind of set. I don't have time to do all that stuff. And with this, it was very much like we were every day, we were kind of sharing ideas and stuff,
Great. And, this was a relatively classic looking scene, like compared to a lot of the series, which is a bit more surreal and weird, for lack of a better word. So could you, talk about maybe some of those scenes and sort of the surrealism that the series
sure.
has?
It's fun for me to look at this show and then also the scene from The Men, because there are parallels where both are kind of grounded in New York City and we really relied heavily on things that we love about the city and staging things within the city, but then looking for points of departure, points of like things that we could, enhance or make kind of cinematic or like dreamlike, in both projects, and color and the lighting was a big part of that, and picking great locations and how we move the camera. It's just a lot of like exciting dynamic camera movement in both of these things. It was, again, I feel like the camera movement is more, I guess it's about creating a world, but for me, it's back to that thing of like treating it, focusing it on character and the shape of a scene versus the overall feel of the show or the thing, like kind of anchoring it in the trajectory of a character within a certain moment, or a certain arc within an episode or something like that.
And I think this is something that all three of you do in your work is work in a way that's very. There's a subjectivity. There's a way that all of you go inside the minds of the characters. And in Scorsese's films, I feel like his films are often very subjective. And The Irishman, I don't want to give away much about it, but there's a flashback that sort of sets up. It's a film that's sort of done in flashback. Like so it's very much inside the mind of the main character. So you guys are now going to get to see about 2 minutes of The Irishman. Do you want to say anything about this? It's a scene from the tribute to Frank that happens sort of an hour or two into the film.
The Frank Sheeran appreciation night. Just a quick thing, we'll talk about it as it screens, but this is, I think, one example of when you face a location which has limitations that are very challenging, and trying to figure that out. I was terrified of it, and there are many pages of we shot there for 5 days. 4 or 5, I don't remember, but there was a lot happening in this location. And I, for example, there was no way to light from above, and it's a restaurant, not a restaurant. It's you'll see it. It's this big event place. So I had to figure out a way to make it work. And I think thanks to that limitation, we came up with something that I think kind of worked. But
I think it works.
Okay, so by the way, these shots we had to end up doing against green screen with the background plate of location. But anyway. You see all those little lights on the balconies. Those are tiny parkans that we set up to be able to light. They actually lit part of the scenes. And you'll see at some point all these red table lamps that you see back there. That was inspired on Network, on this shot that Owen, in the movie Network, Owen Roizman shot. And so I saw this scene that had all these red lamps, and I thought, that's it. We'll make it red. We'll make the scene with this red glow to it. So that's an important part of the design of it. But also, for these moments, I knew that if it was just this red glow, I would lose moments like that, like her look. I would maybe lose what's happening with them. So I added this spotlight thing, which is, gently, romantically just going through the people. But I was talking to the electricians handling these spotlights to try to hit specific moments, and to be moving it around and, okay, hit him as he's walking, boom, and things like that. So, so anyway, this was a pretty tricky design, and a lot of the scene has 3 moments where the characters separate from the party, and have very intimate, tremendous discussions that are life and death, and so we had to find a way of making that intimate and feel like they're still in the party, but in the maybe darkened corner or in some area, in this case in the balcony, and then again, this is shot with 2 cameras simultaneously, one on Bob and one on Pesci at the same time. So creating that sort of environment, that sort of dark feel in the balcony was really difficult to get light into the eyes of both of them, and still get the contrast. I had to literally have lights, hanging with poles out into the top of, it was really difficult. But anyway, there it is.
Okay, so thank you so much. I want to make sure we have time for audience questions. I want to acknowledge we have one of the world's great cinematographers in the audience with us today, so I want to acknowledge Ed Lockman.
Yeah.
Ed, do you have a question?
We should ask Ed a question. Yeah, I guess, we talked about it also a moment ago. In The Irishman, the look of the movie is film, and that was always intention. And so we shot whatever we could on film, which might be about 40 or 50% of the movie. And of course, it's a memory, most of it, and emulated still photography stocks like Kodachrome, Ektachrome for different eras. But so that's also why I felt we needed that texture of like motion picture film. So I made Pablo Hellman from ILM promise me that he would match all the things that we had to shoot on digital. But it was pretty tricky, especially in the color timing, to massage the digital to come a little closer to the look of film. But certainly the last section of the movie where there's no CGI is all film, and I think you kind of feel it, but still, I think they did a pretty good job matching, and I think it comes together. But there is a different feel to the ending, and when you see it, you might notice it, and that's all actual motion picture film. Negative.
I'm going to ask one thing, and then do the rest will be audience questions. But because we're doing this retrospective of 100 years of the ASC, I'm going to just read the list of films that are being shown, and I want you to say it, tell everybody here what films they pick, one or two that they have to see. So America, Dave Chappelle's Block Party, Days of Heaven, Dead Man, The Godfather Part 2, The Grapes of Wrath, The Hard Way, He Walked by Night, Leave Her to Heaven, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, The Passion of Anna, Soldier Girls, and Street Angel. So what titles jump out from that?
McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's my favorite all time, I think, for cinematography.
Yeah. What about it?
It has a texture unlike anything I think I've ever seen. It's so incredible, and I just think you feel that the film was kind of pushed as far as it can possibly go, in that era and that time, and it's so exciting to see, and the way the zoom lenses are used in that film it's phenomenal. Yeah.
Great.
You go.
Okay. For me, it's Days of Heaven.
Okay.
A huge fan of Nestor Almendros. He was a great inspiration. He is, but since I started being aware of what cinematography was, I used to do Super 8 movies, and I just didn't know. You do a movie, that's it. Of course, you do the camera, right? You have to light it to see something. But I didn't quite understand what a cinematographer did until I read Nestor Almendros' book, A Man with a Camera, and then started seeing his work. And Days of Heaven is an incredible example of naturalistic lighting and it feeling so powerful at the same time. And so that was, for me, a revelation of how you could make something look and feel authentic and real and yet have guts and power to it. So it's a huge influence for that movie for me.
Great.
I'm gonna go with my favorite, Robbie Mueller, Dead Man, who we lost this year. And Robbie's always been my greatest inspiration. Dead Man is incredible work, and I think all of his work kind of speaks to this patience. A cinematographer who really listens in scenes, and something that I learned from him that has kind of shaped my world. I read some interview maybe in college with him where he talked about that he never moves the camera unless the character moves and never anticipates the action. And that's something that I always notice and recognize in his work, is that he's really present in ways that not a lot of people are.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a great recommendation.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, any questions? Okay, go ahead.
I have a question for Chris. That first scene that you showed in the exterior, I'm curious if there was any difficulty when you scouted with the director.
Be careful, he's right here. Be careful.
If perhaps you were looking for certain things, like for coverage or available light, that maybe was not like a huge priority for the director, perhaps, and how do you, when you're scouting, especially for like low budget, how do you balance like, as much as you're trying to serve the story, like if there's something you're prioritizing versus what the director prioritizes?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's always a challenge, and with The Mend, it was such an ambitious movie and so full of ideas. I think the role I ended up playing is like trying to cull those ideas down into something that was we could do with the resources that we had. I'm trying to think with that specific scene. I mean, John and I know each other well. I feel like we were on the same page a lot. I think it's like what I said before, is trying to contain your background so you're not, seeing the whole world, the world that you can't really light well, and that happens a lot when you're scouting with directors, and you get nervous as they're kind of walking around and looking. They start looking at other things that you don't want them to look at, and you're like, okay, let's keep it over. Let's stay over here. This is great here. Right here. Let's. I remember with that scene, I think a lot of challenges with that, but we had to have this big dolly set up, big for us at that time, like dolly through the weeds, like it had to feel like they were emerging from sort of this no man's land, and how do you find that in a New York City park, and then how do you lay dolly track there with a 3-person crew, and how long is it going to take you, and all that stuff, and trying to how much screen time do you need them walking, we couldn't do Steadicam or anything, so and again, like with those kind of things, it's like, okay, we can spend all this time, effort, and money setting it up, but if it's not long enough to give you to cover the dialogue you need to cover or tell the story you need to tell, then it's not worth it, right? So that stuff, that stuff becomes very challenging, and it becomes about getting on the same page, I guess.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question for Rodrigo, because he's leaving. 2 questions. The first one, I want to know about the three-eyed monster. Why you have the 2 cameras. Is it purely technical? And you said something about depth, and I didn't know what you meant by that. And then the second question is, what is it like to work with Al Pacino, Joe Pesci, and Robert De Niro? And what are exact conversations you guys have?
With who? Exactly. Okay. So the 2 witness cameras on the sides of the main one, were one of the main things going into the project was that the actors and Scorsese didn't want tracking marks on their faces. So what those cameras were shooting was actually infrared. So they had a filter to knock out all the light except infrared. And then infrared light around the lenses, which was, so those cameras were lighting from the lens with infrared. So that it created a very flat infrared image that saw tracking marks that were put on the actors' faces, but they were only visible to infrared. So we couldn't see them. The main camera couldn't see it, but the infrared cameras could. So that's what the computers used to track and to mold the faces, the CGI faces that then would replace the actual face. So that's why the witness cameras, and so it was a huge endeavor, and the whole infrared thing. Anyway, it was a kind of a nightmare. But once we figured it out, it was pretty okay. But so working with these guys, amazing. And one of my favorite moments was on my birthday. My wife got a poster of my favorite movie, Raging Bull, and got them to sign it. So Pesci, Scorsese, and De Niro signed my poster. So anyway, that was my favorite interaction with them. But I mean, what was incredible for me was certainly witnessing their performances. Was incredible. But when I saw it finally come together, the movie has all these different, snippets and many scenes, and many things happen. So of course, when you shoot this little scene and you see a performance, oh, that was good. That was good. Oh, that was subtle. Oh, that might have been a little too much. But you don't know, right? And then you see it all together. This is a movie where it's happened the most to me ever in my career, where you go like, oh, I get it. I understand what they were doing, these masters, because when you just do a little piece, it's like, okay. But then when you see, oh, how that little piece adds to this other little piece, plus the other piece at the end, plus this other thing, it's like a lifetime. And these guys really captured that. And that was truly thrilling to experience that, to see them do it and then to see the result was really something.
I just want to hear a little bit more about if they have different working styles. And I'm so curious about Joe Pesci. This is a great different kind of role for him. He plays kind of a boss, and it seems like, I don't know, it's an amazing piece of work and really special. So, well,
one interesting thing was, especially for the AD team, was managing who got to set first, or that sort of thing, and trying to get them at the same time, and then, De Niro's not ready, so don't bring Pesci, let's wait. And there was all this sort of thing, and they're all friends and they love each other, but there is also that little funny thing, who's more important or not. It was really interesting, managing all that. But De Niro, for example, he's certainly quiet on set. He had a specific tiny little tent with one chair, like the size of one person, and he sat on his tent. And that's it. He just sat in his little tent while things were ready, and then would come out. And so you knew not to talk to him, right? Not to disturb him at all, But in a good way, he wasn't, blocked out from. But he just needed to be in his space, And Pesci would arrive and be on set and be chatting, with us and be like, maybe even bad mouthing De Niro. That was a thing he liked to do, like, oh, come on, And then Pacino was always with an iPod. He was listening to Hoffa all the time. He was listening to speeches of Hoffa and just memorizing the cadence and the way he talked, and he really got into that. And the characters are so different too, and the styles. So it's really amazing to see the difference of, say, Pesci, who's this sort of contained power, and then Hoffa, who's this bigger than life man, but then how Hoffa becomes this really warm character, which I did not expect, but it does happen. You kind of love the guy, and De Niro, who's does nothing. His face is right, but you see all these things happening, but he's not doing anything. But you feel it. It's incredible. I really was blown away by it.
Was Pacino eating ice cream all the time off set? That's the big motif in the film.
Yeah.
The character's always eating ice cream.
Yeah, but no, he'd only eat it when he had to eat it.
Okay. Well, I should. You have to catch a plane, so So I really am grateful for you to be here after like an hour of sleep, probably too.
Something like
So,
that. Thank
so
you, David.
thanks so much, Rodrigo, and
Thank you.
Well, great to meet you. And
Thank you very much.
we're not going to badmouth you at all. So. Yeah. So we can take some more questions for Chris, Ashley. Go ahead.
I just want to ask what it's like when like a director gives you a shot list. I'm sure it's different depending on the collaboration. Oh, thank you. But I guess like when the director hands you a shot list, does it change? How does it, or how does it not change or change when you enter the equation?
I mean, I think, every collaboration is very different. I think, what you're bringing is a point of view, and, you talk about lighting. You're bringing so much more than just a shot list. And for me, it's about having a conversation with the director because, any amount of prep that they want to give, I always take. And that can be as abstract as they want to. I like to go to museums with people or like listen to music, cook a meal. But the shot list to me, it's like a conversation that you're having with somebody, an approach that you have when you get onto set. So everything has to, especially if you're working in lower budget, it's not like I am ever on set and can control every single situation. And for me, a shot list is a guide because I think it really comes to life when you see actor's block. So it's just kind of a question. But, I shot second unit on Knives Out coming up. And Ryan is like a master at setting up frames, but he needs Steve Yedlin to like make those frames come to life. So it's like this true collaboration, and watching them was really eye-opening for me to just kind of see these two masters come together and have different kinds of conversations. And I think for me, I like working with first-time directors a lot because I think the kinds of conversations and the ways that you can push them are very different than maybe like a totally seasoned person. And, sometimes I crave like very seasoned directors because it's exhausting. But, it's all a conversation.
I was curious about that because you've done 3 films with Josephine Decker, like how she evolved. I mean, it seems like she grew in a lot of ways. I mean, to have the confidence to do, she was always pretty bold in her work, but she seems to have really evolved as a director.
Yeah, I mean, for somebody like Josephine who came from a performance background, I think, for me, I think everyone has the tools in them to tell a story. It's just how you want to tell it and why. And if you haven't, R.I.P. Agnes Varda, her documentary in the festival is kind of a masterclass of creativity, a masterclass of like what it means to make work and why you decide to make work. And, I think for Josephine, she has a world that she wants to build. And for me, I started shooting for her when I was 23 and fresh out of school. And, our working relationship has evolved. I didn't shoot her newest film, which will come out this year. But for me, it's asking each other to like walk down a path that we don't know where the path leads. And that's a little terrifying and not always how I work. But with her, it's very much about the physicality, about the journey, about process. And, she's kind of refined her process over the years and understood how to do that.
Okay. More right over here.
Can you guys talk about lighting for consistency in the scene and then when you like to break them?
Okay, in case you didn't hear, talk about lighting for consistency within a scene and then when you like to break that.
It's a great question, and I feel like my ideas about that are constantly changing or have been changing, where I think it's good to walk into a space and have an overall concept. This is where the light's coming from, whether it's a window or a particular lamp or whatever. But then, when you're getting into scenes where you're shooting a lot of coverage around the room, you inevitably get into this point where, you're shooting kind of the worst angle for wherever you decided your main source of light was coming from, and you have to make this decision: am I going to be consistent, or am I going to go with what looks better, and can I get away with that? And I think lately I've been leaning more into the direction of like, let's just go with what looks better, and I'm pretty sure I can get away with it as long as it feels like it's somewhat in the territory, you know. Or I think it opens up new ideas where, you know, sometimes I think too much control is a bad thing, and the most recent project I've been working on has been more about thinking about just lighting spaces and thinking holistically, and knowing that sometimes actors might land in light that I wouldn't have conceived of as being the way that I would have lit the scene if I could have put lights everywhere I wanted to, but maybe that's not such a bad thing because it contributes to a sense of realism.
Yeah, and I think, you know, every project's kind of different. The more flexibility I have in my packages, my lighting packages, and like I can kind of get the gear that I want now, I tend to favor more of like, you know, Harris Savitas sort of famously kind of lights from outside, and more practically in a lot of ways. And so like I've been kind of favoring that as like you light the space and then let the space dictate what happens when people move through it.
Over here?
Yeah, have either of you had any experience in shooting color for black and white? And if you do that, how to pre-visualize those scenes?
Yes, I love black and white so much because I think you can light very differently than you can in color, or at least I feel I'm given more creative freedom to do different things. And when you kind of get down to the basics and gradient between black and white, there's so much to see. And for me, how I've been doing it lately is actually Chris and I share a colorist whose work you've seen 4 clips from, Nat Jenks. But, you know, Nat kind of helps me out when I'm working on black and white, so I put in a LUT that, you know, I'm working with a digital camera usually that has a, you know, color gamut, and then kind of taking it away and desaturating it, and then you just kind of have to toggle between a couple looks.
But you're previewing that look on, you're seeing that on set basically.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay, right over here.
Can you talk a little bit about the impact of sound on what you do, both the sound of a space and the sound of the speaking voices and the soundtrack? I don't know enough about how these things are made, but especially the sound of a space.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I feel like having worked so much in television lately, where there's so often a mandate to have a camera on somebody's face, saying the words in the scene for every single moment. I love the idea of thinking about sound, and I think about it when you're not on the person's face, because you're opening up a new kind of dimension to the audience, and you think a new kind of, I don't know, avenue of communication that's not just the text, the words that are written on the page. And I try to think about that when we're shot listing, like imagining what a certain shot might sound like, to open a scene or to get us into or get us out of a scene or over a certain moment, and who knows? I mean, who knows if it'll ever actually end up that way. It's so outside of my realm, but it helps me to imagine what the audience might experience. Yeah.
Can she address that?
Because
yeah.
I thought it was the first film with the 2 women, the sound, the intimacy of the visual, and also the sounds was really interesting.
Yeah, I think for me, especially on a movie where, I can be more poetic and speak to the poeticism of the scene, the space, the actors. If I'm operating and I'm quite close to them, I think another marker of Josephine's work is proximity to people. I'm always kind of within arm's reach. So I'm always listening. It's like if I hear somebody move their hand, it's like I want to follow that. I want to, I kind of tend to shoot with both eyes open at some point during takes to kind of see what they're doing and why I'm hearing a noise. And for me, it's like, maybe my ADD kicks in like crazy. So it's like I can hear everything. If somebody talks, if a crew member's like, you know, chomping on gum or something, it really distracts me because I'm trying to listen to what they're doing in the scene.
Thanks. Okay, right in the middle here.
I have two questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
First,
Just wait for let's get the mic over there.
you mentioned you have a colorist in common. I'm interested in how you guys collaborate with the colorist and how early in pre-production does it work?
Nat's been my colorist since my first film, and I think
almost since
potentially
my first,
with you too. You know, when I took a break from making movies to like make money and shoot television, which is a depressing aspect of my life, but I had to. So Nat couldn't really color TV shows because producers have relationships with Post House, but usually I bring him in quite early. We talk about LUTs. I tell him what I'm shooting for. I pull reference images. I tell him, you know, I'm also a feelings-based cinematographer, and I use that like as a badge of honor, where, you know, it's more of like, how do you want a scene to feel and what do you want the audience to feel during that? So it's usually kind of, I'm not a DP who like sits in a coloring tent on set. So I use my LUTs as like a more overall wash. And so, yeah, it's just kind of approaching the subject matter from that point of view and saying like, this is sort of my goal. And then it makes her coloring sessions more refined and more about making the whole piece cohesive and come together. But certain concepts, I'm always like, I got to do it in camera. If you want a warmer, I'm going to shoot a warm. If you want a cooler, I'm going to shoot a cooler. And I try not to like do major color shifts in post.
I think there's an unfortunate misconception with a lot of people in this business that a colorist is just someone who's down in the post pipeline who just makes things match and, you know, fixes things. And I think we feel the same way with Nat as like a true collaborator, and you work with we work with him like you'd work with any other creative collaborator. And it's so I haven't worked with another colorist where we are having these conversations before you start shooting, and it's he loves that dialogue and we love looking at references, and he's always talking about things he wants to show me that he's been thinking about and talking about, and so it's always this like constant exploration, which is so useful for me, especially when you're moving from project to project. I don't know how it is for you, but it's sometimes it's hard to, you know, figure out what the next look for the next thing is, you know, or get inspired over again, and to have people like that who bring you new ideas is great.
Thank you. And my second question, if that's okay?
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about shooting multiple cameras? Because I think you both operate.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
The bane of my existence.
Cool.
You know, I mean, shooting for two cameras, you just can't light the same way. You can't be as bold. You're constantly thinking, but even just the idea that there's two cameras on set means that a producer's in your ear being like, so where's that second camera being set up? Like, why isn't it being set up? And I find that instead of creating one really great image, you're sometimes just making sacrifices on two images. And again, I work in like a different world. I'm not on the Irishman. I don't, you know, I don't have those kind of tools at my disposal. So you're usually in small spaces, and it always feels like a compromise. You know, we both shot on Broad City, which he did season 4, I did season 5. And, you know, Broad City's different. It's like, you need two cameras. It's comedy. It's not about me and my work. It's like about them and being funny. And so for a show like that, obviously two cameras make sense, but that you have to like prioritize what the goal is. And yeah.
I like two cameras when it's when you're leapfrogging, you're setting up one shot and then you're getting something lined up so that you can kind of jump into the next one. And for like efficiency's sake, I think that can be useful. I used to be opposed to it. And as far as the operator side of it goes, I mean, I do love to operate, but I've also been lucky to work with some really incredible camera operators, and it's great to have a different level of collaboration where you can give them the concept and the overall concept and have them hone it in and make it, make it work. And then you can focus more on the lighting or focus on what the next setup is going to be and kind of use your energy elsewhere.
Okay, we have time for two more. So go there and then yeah.
I think I project pretty loud.
Okay.
Mike's far away. So I want to ask a little bit about technology. Things that work on the tech gear side of things. And in the last, say, 10 years, there's been huge shifts in lighting and camera and even lenses and formats and things like that. Has there ever been a spot where, as technology changes, you've been inspired by the technology itself as you go into your artistic?
Yeah, I mean, I went to a undergrad, or I only went to undergrad, I don't know why I'd say that, but college, where I learned on film. The only camera I still own is my Bolex. And so I sort of favor a less technical approach to cameras. I hire people smarter than myself who can tell me about the newest whatever. But I think the greater leaps, I mean, obviously cameras, but for me, that's just a tool, a capturing format. You make so many other choices that affect the image far more than that. And I'm not like a pixel queen, I don't care. But, I think LED lighting has obviously been instrumental in helping people light very differently. And again, going back to Knives Out, Steve Yedlin has a very specific process for lighting and color approach. And that to me was like that was my grad school basically. And, I bought a color meter, and every single setup, he's fine tuning XY coordinates on the spectrum, the visible spectrum. And so every single setup is measuring and reshaping from the XY. And so I'm also like redoing scenes that he's done with his XY coordinates. And it was so very different from my process, but I could see why it was so beneficial. It's like you can take the color of a sunset and get the XY and then put it into a sky panel and wrap your unit. It has very practical approaches. So that to me was a little revolutionary in my life.
Yeah, I think there's been so many positives with it. I think the thing that's dangerous when you get too enamored with it is it's like if you're enamored with this new technology, especially if it's a specific thing like these, I don't know if you use these like LED tubes, like the Astera tubes or whatever, that are so handy and battery powered and look really cool, then everybody else is going to be enamored with them too, and they're very quickly going to get used and overused, and you have to, so it's like you have to take the new thing and I guess plug it in your old way of working and figure out how to make it do what you want it to do.
So I was wondering, as like indie filmmakers, like you're used to doing like a lot of things like by yourself or like with small crews, and as you get like with bigger crews and stuff, like how do you reconcile not like just like delegating instead of just doing? Because I feel like I have this problem where I've like, I'll just do it, it's fine, I don't have to tell you to do it. But yeah, delegating is like a big thing that I feel like on bigger sets, and it's like a skill that is pretty hard to refine.
I think that's been my, in this break from shooting movies, I joined the union and started shooting TV shows and kind of started, I shot the pilot for Rami, and that was like quite small. And then I've kind of grown and on different kinds of projects at different budget levels. And I think it was like very hard for me because I was working with I have had the same gaffer since my first paid job, Danny April, and he's like my right hand. And suddenly he wasn't in the union and I couldn't have him. And so our shared language that we built together, I had to suddenly speak to somebody else who was speaking a different language. And that was very difficult for me. And so I feel like I'm just now, after, Broad City taught me a lot. That was my first full season of TV. And, that, delegation is super important, and that's part of the job, and managing your crews and managing all the people. And, for me, I had a very difficult time refinding collaborators who, for me, I want somebody who can speak about the story. Who's not just going to show up and just be a technician. And I think that's a very difficult transition. And, now I've realized, you kind of have to be your own person in charge of everything. So my approach has drastically changed, because now it's when I travel for work and I go to a new city and I cannot bring my people, I have to be able to make the adjustment myself. And I think that was a learning experience.
Yeah, you become much more of a manager, which is not the creative side of things that you were imagined you'd be doing, which is it's definitely a challenge. You're thinking about what makes your crew happy or what gets them excited about what they're doing. It's not always the same conversations that you had when you were doing smaller films, and your crews might not know half of the films that you really like, and then you have to kind of figure out where to meet them, what gets them excited. Is it the craft side of things, or is it something else? And just kind of trying to understand where they're coming from, and hiring, getting really good at interviewing and trying to hire the best people or the best fit for your personality.
Thank you.
You want to go? You raised your hand like you had a good question, so we'll give you the last question. Go ahead.
You mentioned a bit about in your relationship with Josephine that she came from a mumblecore background, and that just got me wondering: are there any, relationships that either of you have had with directors where you felt like maybe you were really engaged and interested in the story, but you didn't share the same kind of visual language, and how you overcame that?
Overcoming it is maybe a stretch. I think somebody like Josephine, who is so much about process and so excited about the unknown, she's a very exciting director to work with. I think now I've gotten better at interviewing and talking to directors, and you learn, I took on projects where red flags were being thrown in my face left and right, but I was like, whatever, I'll never work again if I don't shoot this movie. And then it's a nightmare, and I'm shooting myself in the face every night because I'm like, why did I do this when I knew that it was going to be terrible because I didn't get along with the person. And so that to me is just a learning experience. You kind of just get better at reading people, and I try to find directors who I can have conversations with. I met with the director in London. I was doing a BBC show in the spring, and I liked her script a lot. I thought it had problems, but it was a conversation, and she didn't want to answer any of my questions. And I was like, I'm not going to be your DP, because I need a director to come to the table. And just because I ask a question doesn't mean that everyone needs to know the answer, but in my practice, I need to know certain answers, and I need to be able to talk to somebody on a different level. And, it's I have another director here, Alex Eden, who I shot her movie, and it's we slept in the same bed in North Carolina for 6 weeks, and it was every single night we're setting up a projector and watching movies together. We're watching Silent Light. We're looking at all the references, and it's I can have different conversations with her. It's just about finding people who you gel with, I guess.
I definitely went through a stage when I got out of film school where I had a big chip on my shoulder and thought I knew everything about cinema, and I was working with people who were maybe not super visually minded, and it bugged me, because I thought we're not having the same level of conversation that I would have with my film school buddies. And then I kind of had to grow out of that and realize that it's partly my job to kind of get out of them what is inspiring to them and what moves them, and they may not know how to articulate it, but it's up to me to kind of try to help find what that is and pull that out of them. And maybe you find a lot of it in the script, and then you find more of it when you're talking to them and looking at movies together. And it's just, building a library of references, and then or proposing ideas. We could, it could look like this, it could look like that, like respond to this and tell me what you think. And then, and that becomes an exciting role to play once you, engage with it. And it's just, there's just different collaborations with different kinds of directors.
Well, I really appreciate your time and being here. This was great. So thank you so much to both of you for being here. And thanks, everybody. Have a great festival.